Okay. All right, folks. It is a pleasure to be here with you. Happy almost New Year. My name is Mega Sugianto Jewel, and I'll be your volunteer as well as your workshop attendee today. As far as today's workshop goes, it's how to personalize your brand for virtual conversations. Really, given the pandemic and probably in the long run, we're going to have a lot more virtual conversations interacting on our computers more so than in person at times, at least for the time being. And how do we really maximize our presentations, our delivery, and the connections that we have? Before we get started, I want to talk about SCORE. I truly love SCORE because this is how I got started as a small business myself. There are 300 chapters nationwide, 10,000 volunteers. 75 of them are in Los Angeles County. And I can't tell you how many times I've had questions about how to start a business at one point, how to, do some marketing or some financial help in my business. And I've gone to SCORE for mentees and workshops like this one. As far as getting a mentor, I do have a QR code here for you to scan on your phone if you'd like, or you can go to losangeles.score.org and you can find a mentor based on the expertise you're looking for, the location that you're looking for, and there are lots of people for you. If you need any help, my email is on the bottom right corner. Our mission with SCORE is to provide professional guidance and information to maximize the success of your business, America's existing and emerging small businesses. And we have lots of awesome, successful stories from, napkin stage of just creating a business, what to do, getting through all that clutter, and then being able to grow and even sell businesses. That's one of the passions that we see here at SCORE. In terms of workshops, if you haven't explored the calendar, we have a bunch. We have workshops that's from starting your own business to marketing, franchising, creating an online presence. I have another workshop that I'm doing later in the end of the January month. It's going to be about PR. How do you write your pitches? How do you write your stories? So there's a plethora of workshops out there for you to really explore and try out. So, with that, I want to say thank you for joining us and for rewatching this webinar. If you're looking for a mentor, again, losangeles.score.org is the best place for you to go. And if you haven't liked us already, you can always follow us on Facebook along with LinkedIn. And then also, if you like what you see, you have a great experience, or you don't, please reach out and I'd be happy to really listen and explore and how we can make SCORE better for you. So, in terms of this particular webinar, it's a pretty small case here. I want to be laser focused as far as like what we want to accomplish in this particular workshop. It's to prepare us for the virtual world, given that we have this box that we have to play with, and how do you really maximize that space? What do you say sometimes? There are a lot of ums and uhs sometimes when we're doing networking because we don't have that in-person engagement that much anymore. What do you say? How do you refine your tone of voice? How do you present a positive body image or language? And then we'll go over the technicals, whether it's some lighting or microphones. I'll provide also a checklist on how to prepare yourself, along with some of the technicals that you might want to consider. So, a little bit more about me. I was a former television news anchor, reporter, and producer, and my favorite thing is to tell stories. I realize the value of storytelling when, you do a piece on television or what have you, and it's about a pothole, and the next thing you know, that pothole gets covered and it saves that particular neighborhood, or we cover legislature and a law gets passed and the community is happy about that. I really value that particular thing, and the way that I work. It's because for me, I'm a communicator, so I help a lot of small businesses define their messaging. How do we get that out, whether it's through social newsletters, videos, the whole gamut. And then also the other piece is the public relations piece, because exposure and the media and the positive stories, I'm all about it. I love positive stories. The reason being is because there's a lot of noise lately. There's been a lot of noise, and I like to push positive stories out there in the general news, mainstream media, or in the very niche media. And the last thing is, and I know one of our attendees here, we were talking about relationships. I This is one of my priorities, and I speak about it last because without authentic relationships, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I'm sure many people won't be where they're at in their business or their career journey without the people who've invested in them, spent energy and ideas and whatever the case might be with them. And so the relationship aspect of business is important. So, before we get started and jumping in, I know we have one person on the webinar and wanted to see, oh, there's two now, uh, Carly and Wen. I wanted to see if you guys can put in the chat about, what how do you want to be perceived? How do you want to come across? Like, let's say you were to turn on your video right now, like, what's the word that comes to mind? So I'm going to check my chat. So, a couple of things. If you have not found the chat buttons on the very bottom, if you don't, please message me because I'll figure that out. But there are a couple of other, different adjectives, I would say, whether you want to come across honest or assertive, confident, gentle. These are very different, words that you can use. It's not the whole options that you have, but these are the ones that I thought that many people want to be perceived at, maybe. For me, I like to be perceived as, confident, but also honest. Carly says knowledgeable and professional. She is in like the real estate world. We talked a bit earlier, and it's important to really have obviously the expertise. I love it. If when you have a chance, let me know. I love having this interaction, and just know that if you want to have a conversation at any point, you can drop it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and then we can go from there. I love all these different adjectives because it helps me really think about, okay, walking into this particular webinar, I had to really do the same thing. Like, who do I want to be perceived? Because you guys don't know who I am. I don't know who you are. And that first impression is obviously very important. So today we're going to talk about, the visual branding of your business, of yourself, the way that you act, the way that you speak. We're going to talk about those different components of it. First, visuals, because that's what we first see, right? That goes into the gear also. The sound, the gear and technicalities, but also the way that we're going to be able to talk, and how I use my breathing and singing methods. Physical appearance, as far as probably your environment, and then what to say during some situations. I have a couple of situations that you might be able to kind of pick and choose and make that your own. Okay. So whenever it comes down to visuals, I talked about this box that we're working with. How do you want to appear? Do you want to appear, bright, or uh, oversaturated, or really dark? There's a very good medium as far as why I light the way that I light. It's because I don't want to necessarily be in the dark where those shadows create kind of a grim feature. My angles need to be really good to make sure that we're at eye level. Let me walk you through some of those components. So, whenever you're working with your environment, I say this box and whatever you use, your computer, your phone, lighting matters. And the fact that we have natural light, meaning like the sunlight that's coming through your window, we want to be able to take advantage of that. Unfortunately, I don't have a window right next to me. So, what I do is I have some different lightings, and I have actually an example that I can show you as far as some lighting equipment that I have, like very affordable. So whenever we talk about bright lights, there are There's the ones that you can plug in. I use like a very, very bright LED light. But if you're on the go, there's always like these clip-on lights that you can use, and it's pretty effective for a short component of time. And this helps light you up in a way where, okay, like you can see me, they're not a whole bunch of shadows, but the angles that you do is pretty important. So you don't want to have like something that's going directly at you, because I think having something directly at you could be a little bit one too blinding, or below you, because that creates shadows in unnecessary places. So what you want to do is have it kind of use either a filter, whether it's a little towel or something that's kind of see-through that has a white hue, or you could use, so like what I do is I bounce it off the walls. I use the light to bounce it off the walls, so that way it could be a little bit more smoother than if it were to just be hitting me. So like this is hitting off the walls, like this is hitting my face. So there's a good way to use lighting in a way where it doesn't like oversaturate, where it gets way too hot. Like, what are you doing, Mega? To, well, okay, that's calm. Like, all right, I like watching it. Doesn't hurt my eye. Doesn't affect me that anyway. I looked it up on Amazon. This one's very popular. There's ring lights that everybody seems to use. This one's a pretty good one. You'll just have to watch out. Like if you have like glasses like mine, you can definitely see the reflection of them. So you can always kind of gauge and use a filter, or you can use this particular ring light and then have another tripod like in front of it, like a good distance, to give yourself that filter on the light. So that gives you good appearance for your webinars, for your client calls, the whole gamut. So for sound, as far as sound is very important. I particularly have what I have is because I have three yappy dogs, and I like to have conversations where I'm not affected, even though I hear them in the background. So my goal here is whenever we're having those presentations, you want to be crisp, you want to be heard, right? And you want to be clear about it. It depends on what your goal is. Sometimes your computer screen is just fine, but if you're having um, like a webinar like this, you might want to have a noise canceling headphones and microphone, like a USB based microphones, like what I have here, but I use this for podcasting. Also, like you could use your like a USB wireless one. I have a couple. I have a few mics for, you know what? I don't know why, but I have a bunch because I like to collect a lot of gear. But there are different types of mics that you can buy, whether it's ones for your phones, like this one. This is kind of cool. This is a Shure one for your iPhone. It's lightning based. It's got a wind reducer, meaning like if there's wind, it doesn't necessarily like make those noises. And it's pretty effective, and it's small. So depending on what your purposes are, whether you're using your phone to make those phone calls, to make those networking events, to have those client conversations, those are things that I would say you could use. All right. So as far as physical appearance, I think, whether we like it or not, there is some form of criticism or judgment that you might have based on what you see, whether it's my face, my hair. So there are obviously ways to go about that. For me, makeup is kind of like not something that I have an expertise on, but you want to go with like a more matte look. Even with men, for my husband, I've wanted to do this. He's never allowed me to do it, but I use like translucent powder to just get rid of that shine, just because the light, whenever it's shining on you, it can create like bouncing effects where it might not necessarily be the most, it doesn't look that great. So that's one way to kind of just take care of your shine. Translucent powder, knock it off, you're all set. In terms of a confident posture, I have this desk here, and I tend to kind of lean in and just kind of like, look at people as if I'm having that conversation in a coffee shop. But what I've realized is I'm also not using this box of mine to the best of my ability. So rather, by sitting back, having your typical shoulders kind of like good posture, it gives the presentation of being more confident, being more engaged, having that eye contact with the camera, and pretending that it's, someone on the other line that I know or is a friend of mine. One thing that I wanted to add, if you want to have this, I'm going to stop sharing because I have a blog that I created for you the other day. It's how to Zoom 101. And I got this friend who's a good friend of mine from NBC. So I took this off where, one, download Zoom or download Skype, whatever the platform might be, download it. And I go over the internet speed test is important because you need to know, like, hey, what's your upload speed and what's your download speed? Does that kind of differentiates whether you should be on HD camera or on, SD's standard definition? The framing and light, I particularly prefer horizontal over vertical like any day. And the reason being is because you have to really think of your medium. So for like Carly, or for when, I don't know what your particular environment looks like, but for me, I'm always doing webinars. So typically most people doing webinars, possibly good chance, are they're on their computers and or something that's kind of steady. So that's a 19 by 9, a 16 by 9 ratio, meaning like it's a computer screen. For people on the go, if you're maybe an influencer or if you're catering to social media, you're probably looking for people who are scrolling, so that might be a vertical medium. My preference is always horizontal because I could always manipulate that to make it into a vertical later down the line. Okay, this is a pet peeve of mine, but it happens. So, whenever we have these conversations, whether it's a networking event or it's a conversation with your mom or your client or whatever, I think framing matters big time. And the reason being is if you could take a look at the two pictures, um, you could see there's a vast difference in just the angles. If it's going to be something where your computer's on the bottom of, like, let's say you're the very lowest of your table and it's looking up at you, you're going to be seeing up your nose, which isn't necessarily the best angle possible. When they were doing selfies back in the day and you had this like really, really high angle trying to get that best, position of yourself, the same concept kind of follows where you want to be eye level. You want that camera just looking at your eyes and not necessarily being too high or too low, because it does make a big difference whenever it comes down to conversations. Psychologically, this is my theory. Whenever we're looking down, we're like talking like you're an inferior. Let's say you're on the other line and I'm higher up and I'm looking down at you. I'm looking down and you're an inferior of mine versus the other way. Like you could flip around that whole psychological aspect of it. So there is this, you can find it at megajewel.com/blog. I've created that for you. And then I'm going to go back to the presentation. So I have that blog, and that I'll be able to share that with you with my presentation as well. This one's a little much. You could read through it on your own, but it's a breathing technique that I like to use whenever we're having a conversation or whenever I used to do my broadcasting days, because the way that we speak, it's one thing what we say, but the techniques that I found singers use is quite helpful. The Whenever we're breathing through our diaphragm, we don't necessarily use the muscles like up here to talk, but rather we use the projections of our diaphragm to get that power going, to make sure you enunciate, to make sure that we have enough air to be able to prolong that conversation, what we're saying, to make sure we're not like stopping at every other word. So if you want to take this and kind of practice it maybe for 5 minutes a day, or 3, 4 times a week or something like that, feel free to. The link is going to be in this particular presentation. I like it. It's helped me. Sometimes I'm on the floor and I'm trying this particular exercise just to use my diaphragm a little bit more because it's not something I would typically engage in. But I do definitely see a difference. I'll be curious to see what you think about it whenever we have those conversations and telephone calls or Zoom calls, what have you. Okay. So what to say? This really depends on what you're looking for. So if you want to go on the chat and say like, these are the typical scenarios that I'm facing, I'd be happy to kind of customize and tailor it. But the general sense of whatever I walk into have very similar like common denominators that I find. One, you always need to know who you're talking to and like what level of engagement they might be experiencing. If it's, for example, for me, I have clients who, or potential clients who might be tax, service based. I need to know a little bit more of that background. What kind of personalities do I typically deal with? What are they looking for? And the question that typically needs to be answered is what's in it for them? Like, how can I make sure that time that we spend is valuable for them? Ensure that you're giving them that particular value point, of course. And then this is where I see people stumbling on like networking events. The three things to highlight and keeping it simple, or whenever they're doing a presentation or whatnot. We often think way too much, overthinking certain situations, not necessarily like knowing what to say or memorizing things, and things get jumbled up. So, whenever we have like, whether it's a proposal or it's a pitch of some sort, think of three things that you want them to take away. Then from those three things, pick keywords, and then keeping it simple and having that conversation going, okay, well, what do they want to hear? How can it be authentically me? And then each topic, each bullet point, address that conversationally. And then ending it strong. And this is my weakness one of times, a few times, is we end it strong, but then I go, yeah, or a filler word, or there are ways where you're like, okay, this is the word that I want to end this particular virtual conversation with, and that's it. So you know what you're gonna and how you're gonna end it, and that's gonna be a good lead. Okay. As far as virtual experiences, I would say there are different ways. And I don't know, Carly and Wen, what are your experiences? I know, Carly, we had talked about, maybe if you don't want to, just put on the chat, but there are interviews that you could typically use the tips and advice that I shared with. So whether you're having a job interview or you're interviewing somebody else, you can use these particular tips. If you have clients that you're talking to, sometimes they kind of have their own agenda, but then like having to align and making sure that the tips that I'm sharing about presentation, visuals, sound, all that stuff can be used. Virtual networking, I think, is going to be fun. That's what I'm going to highlight next. And then, funny enough, I thought about this. I had a family friend virtual game night, and they didn't practice like the technicals at all. So we spent like 30 minutes figuring out like how to put the PS4 to the TV or something like that. And it was just a hot mess. So that leads to my next topic of, you got to practice, right? Having an extra computer. This is kind of like my layout. I'll explain to you. I have my computer that I do my webinar on. That's a camera. That's the presentation. I have it directly in front of me with the presentation notes and what have you. Then I've got my second computer, or monitor per se, that has all the windows that I want to do the screen share. That way I'm not like going through and making mistakes and not sure of what to pick next, and then wasting your time as a viewer. I like to have that extra monitor just because it helps me navigate the many windows. This is helpful for whenever I do client presentations and I have those Zoom calls. I have the Zoom call here, I have the presentation here, I talk, and then they walk away feeling, okay, cool, that was seamless. There weren't a lot of technical issues. I know that during networking events that aren't necessarily as successful in terms of technicalities, I definitely feel like the momentum gets broken and I kind of disengage a little bit, especially when there's not much conversation with me and I don't have to be very attentive. So that's one. Organize and practice how you want that layout to be. So, especially when you're doing something like this where it's a webinar or something recorded, you've got one shot. So, having that practice, being able to go, okay, this is what I'm going to do first, second, third, and fourth. This is how I'm going to work this computer and mouse during the webinar really helps because there were times where I've done webinars years past that I didn't necessarily practice, and it turned out to be, kind of a few things that I've messed up on. So the third bullet point is whenever you're sharing video, whether it's on, Facebook Live or on this type of component, you got to test it out. So this week even I had like a different like microphone or different like setting, and I shared a video with audio, and it was like playing in a loop, and it was just so loud, and that could have been prevented if we had tested. Luckily it was pre-recorded, so it wasn't necessarily a big deal. But whenever you're doing something live or in front of a client, you really don't want to mess that particular up because that experience can be broken. Of course, the last one is check your settings. Like, this is a no-brainer because oftentimes whenever you set up something for Zoom one day and then you turn it off and it has a system update or something like that, it can be all reset. And that could prevent you from doing what you're looking for. And then you end up scrambling at the end in the last minute, and being able to check your audio, your camera, whether it's on the right setting, HD, you want a little touch up, you want, the mirrored effect, you want filters, what have you, check your settings beforehand. I talked about this earlier as far as networking goes. Whenever we do some networking events, whether you're looking for clients or potential partners, what have you in your business, they always ask, like, share like 10 seconds or 15 seconds of who you are in your business. One of my favorite things to do is kind of switch it up a little bit, but I think it actually works. And I've gotten feedback that it does work. So whenever they say, introduce who you are, what you do, I would like to structure it where you say your name at the beginning and then you say it at the end. And the reason being is when you say your name at the beginning, nobody really knows who you are. They haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to you. And that's that. But whenever you say, why you do what you do, whether you're whatever business you're doing, and who you are, having those emotional components of it, like that structure, they're like, okay, I'm really engaged. But then they've probably forgotten your name at that point because it's going so fast. That's when you say your name again. Hi, I'm Mega Sugianto Jewel. I love communicating because it really elevates my clients' communications and marketing and whatever. And then why I do it is because I'm passionate about storytelling and I know the value of storytelling. And then I end it, you can find me at megajewel.com, and my name is Mega Sugianto Jewel. So that structure, that kind of like weaving of name, who you are, why you're doing it, little nuggets you want to share, and ending it with your name is quite frankly impactful. Try it. Give me your suggestions, what you think about it. Whenever you do those, whether it's, a 2-minute conversation or the 30 seconds or less, remember those bullet points or your elevator pitch that you have and go like, okay, here are my bullet points. I The three things that I particularly talk about is the storytelling, data-driven strategies, and relationship building. Those are the three things that I focus because I want people to know, like, that's what I stand for. Those are my pillars, and I hope you walk away from those. So I take those three bullet points and then I can elaborate on them. That way, I don't have to necessarily memorize everything. Every single conversation is different. Every conversation that I have is unique, but I have those three frameworks in mind. And the reason being is because when we try to memorize it, there are a couple of times where I've experienced other people trying to say what they've written down. It becomes very robotic and it doesn't sound genuine. It sounds like you're saying your sales pitch, and I'm not necessarily interested. I think there's a little bit of value actually in having a few hiccups, because you're present and not necessarily like a whole complete mess up, but being authentic doesn't necessarily mean you have to be perfect every single time. So those are my 2 cents. I'm not sure if anybody else struggles with this. I know a few of my clients, whenever we do public speaking consultations, they go, "Oh my gosh, actually one of my former clients was like a real estate agent, and he was like, I don't know what to talk about." And I'm like, "Yes, you do. You totally know what you're talking about." And the reason being is because you are the expert of your particular industry. Whatever the case might be, whether it's tax or accounting or, relationships or real estate or social media, whatever the case might be, whatever the niche you might have, just remember, you know you best. You have that content in your brain, and all you got to do is, pull it out and share it. So, some of the strategies, I'll talk a little bit more about virtual conversations again, but don't overthink it. I've been there, done that, and you waste a lot of time. And all you got to do is prepare, sit down, relax, and have a blast. I think practice doesn't necessarily always make perfect, but you'll definitely get better over time. So you will improve the more you do it. And I can guarantee that you will do lots better. All right. Over time, from reporting to anchoring to being a small business owner, being in front of the camera, behind the camera, I've got some advice for you. Whenever you're talking solo like this particular one, it's a bit different than most conversations, is because I'm talking with myself, potentially, if I don't have, other people on the line, for a really long time, an hour and a half, 30 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, 10 minutes can be a long time, or it seems as though. So whenever you're talking with yourself, whether it's on a webinar or they're really relying on you to talk, the technique that I use early on is, whenever you're doing the news segment, you're like talking for like 30 minutes, sometimes 3 hours. For a newscast, you're like, what am I going to say? So what I did initially was I took a picture of my grandma and I put it right underneath the camera, and I go, okay, I'm talking to my Oma. And that helped me a lot in the very beginning. And sometimes you might just be able to think about the person that you really cherish and have that connection with and really want to talk to. And this particular technique is helpful because it helped me feel calm, slow down my tempo, and enunciate better, because that's what my grandma always wanted me to do. And this over time helps you kind of relate more and focus less on the camera or this green dot that's on my screen, but really talk it with somebody on the other line. So that hopefully is something beneficial for you to take away. Second, when you're looking for a score mentor, look for the specializations that they have. And I can walk you through how to find that mentor just a little bit. But having someone who's in a communication, if that's something that you need, they have that listed. Someone who can go like, no, no, Megan, like you don't know what you're doing, or you can improve by doing X, Y, and Z. That's always helpful. Someone else to keep you accountable, someone else to help you with constructive criticism, in my opinion. Third, I don't know if you've heard of Toastmasters, but it's awkward and amazing. Toastmasters is this like public speaking, networking, like group club thing where you can join, you can have icebreaker conversations, you can speak in front of random people, and you just improve your public speaking abilities. Because I cannot tell you how handy it has been to just learn and know how to speak in public. And the reason being is this particular group, Toastmasters, how I got started. They judged me, and this sounds very harsh, but I had to give like a 2-minute presentation about some random topic. and somebody on the other line, on the other, on the other side of the table, was counting my ums and my ahs and my you knows. Those are filler words that I like to use to whenever I don't know what to say in between. So having someone else kind of judge you and critique you in that sense, and I got this little piece of paper at the end, which said, you could have improved here. I really liked what you said here, and so forth, gave me an opportunity to go and introspect. Oh, yes, I totally could have done better. I'm not going to beat myself over it, but I know that I can do better. And then, fourth, this is pretty another awkward one, but it might be helpful, is recording yourself on video. This is super easy. Everybody seems to do it. A lot of people make it seem so easy, but sometimes, depending on who you are, you're like, I'm not sure what to say. I feel very robotic. So trying recording yourself on video is a good way of keeping things without, anybody to watch, keeping things private, and then reviewing it later. The reviewing part though is give yourself a break. Don't be so hard on yourself. And start with the filler words. The ums, the ahs, the ands, sometimes so's that connect the sentences. You're like, so this, so that, and this and that, those types of words, to just kind of tally it up, like in a 30-second recording or in a 1-minute recording. And you could pick a topic about your dogs per se, and you could just talk. How many of those filler words do you say? Then the next step is you can always go, okay, well, what's my structure there? How was my flow? What did I start with? What was my middle? How did I end with? How did I end that particular recording? Then you can go over time and start analyzing how you talk, what you say, how you present yourself, whether your eyes wander, whether your hand gestures are a thing, do you articulate yourself well? So many questions that you can pick one thing at a time and go from there. It can totally be uncomfortable, I'll give you that, but it can give you a lot of insight. Okie dokie. Goals. This is the last slide before we end, and I have a couple of things to show you. As far as goals, I do hope that you got something out of this, whether it's technicalities, the lighting, the microphone. Those are components to the visual brand that you want to present. That's very important to the overall piece. Details do matter, and I do believe that. So whenever you go through this, presentation, you're like, okay, I want to work on my breathing, or I want to work on my uh, appearance or whatever, or my angles. Pick one and get really good at that one at a time. Because I've found myself, and I've found some clients also, who get way too overwhelmed when they try to do everything. So pick one that you're like, okay, here are four things that I want to work on. First, I want to do my, my visual appearance. Second, I'm going to do my lighting. Third, I'm going to do my mic. Fourth, I'm going to do the components of my elevator speech, or what have you. Just do it one at a time. And then this is one thing that I've struggled personally, is to award yourself and acknowledge that you've done something good, even if it seems small. Recording something that seems really, really awkward or uncomfortable is a big win. I found that because I didn't want it, I was preventing myself from doing it. And it was just like my own self battle for whatever reason. But me allowing myself to record and record again and record again. One of my takes one time was like about 25 takes, but I did it. I think it was a small win that ended up to be, a good thing overall. So with that, I want to say thank you. I have a couple of things to share with you before we end, and I want to take some questions at the end too. Where one, this is how you want to connect to a mentor, and SCORE is a nonprofit that has a mentor specifically for you. I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I'll show you how to get there. And I do have a question there, so let me get to it in one moment. But let's go to Chrome. All right, so this is the blog. So whenever you go to losangeles.score.org, you want to, let's go through the whole thing. You should be able to see this. So you can find a workshop here, or you can find a mentor. So I particularly like mentors, and zip codes no longer really apply for me because I feel like, given the COVID whole pandemic thing, um, it's going to be hard to meet in person. I don't recommend that. So whenever we search for a mentor, we can do keywords. So for example, I want communication. So then I could search for communication and read their bios and see, what areas of expertise do they really have? Do they align with what I'm looking for? Sometimes I go, okay, this is good. Let me look down their LinkedIn and see if that's going to be a good match. So this is one way to find a mentor. You already know how to find a workshop, so that's kudos to you. And let me go to the question. So Carly says, do you have another blog specific to tech and products you use, like the mic, the lighting? And I wasn't sure someone was going to ask me this, but I can create you one. But I didn't want to just put stuff up because it depends. I don't want to be recommending like thousands of dollars in gear for someone who just needs like maybe $50 worth of gear. So, Carly, if you can send me an email, it's hello@megajewel.com. I will be happy to figure out, what you already have, because I think you can even use what you have, and then we can go from there, because I cannot tell you how much my husband will just pick and poke and prod because of how much lighting gear I have. I have 4 of these and I don't even know why. So I will be happy to set something up for you. And the last thing I wanted to share is this evaluation form that I created for, well, in this case, the both of you. This is an evaluation form that you can print out and you can take away with you. It's a way to kind of gauge where you're at and where you're going to go later. For example, from 1 to 5, you're like, 1 is a low score, 5 is a low score, and we can always calculate over time. So before you do anything, you can print this out and mark where you feel, as far as, are you clear in terms of, in your own perception? Were you clear when you're talking? Were you easy to understand? Did you fumble a lot? Did you feel like you hesitated? Whatever the case might be, mark that up and say, okay, I'm not feeling so shabby. I'm not feeling too confident there. I'm going to put a 1. Just put that down. Honest opinion. Vocal variety. Pauses. Sometimes pauses can be a very good thing because it gives emphasis. It really focuses on what's important, but also the different variations of talking. Do you think that you have a good vocal variety? Pick 1 through 5. Eye contact, go forth. In this particular case, is, do you make contact with the video camera as if you're talking to the other person, or do you wander? Whatever the case might be, mark it. Gestures. I'm a victim of this particular thing, and not in a good way, because like my hands go all over the place. Like I am always dancing for some reason. So whatever the case might be, mark it. And then audience awareness is, it's a little different for virtual stuff. Where do you think that they're engaged? And that's a little bit difficult in this case, because you don't necessarily, like in a webinar form, you don't necessarily have that instant feedback. But if you do get it, versus like, whenever you're doing like a client conversation or networking event, you have that instant feedback from the other person. Try to think about, were you engaging in that particular scenario? And then interest. Does the audience that you're talking to, whether it's clients or the other people on the social media, like engagement, do they even care? Do they engage, etc.? And this one, and Carly, email me and I'll give it to you, kind of like a list depending on what you need. But I put this together because preparation is very important, right? Like you don't want to mess up on a live event because you've got that one shot, one opportunity, and then like things blow up in your face. You're like, oh my gosh. So I like to have a checklist and check it twice. It's like Christmas every single time I do a webinar, where I have to make sure my lighting works. Even before the event, you have to make sure that the bulbs are like working, the camera and the batteries are there. The background is clear. I had a vacuum because my dog toys were like all over the place. So and there's a dog ramp here, so you don't know if there's a dog that's gonna go. Like we have to really set the schedule up, checking the internet speed because now I'm in this one apartment with my husband who I dearly love, but we have like five devices, like phones and iPads and what have you. I have to like turn off everybody else's device Wi-Fi because I need to make sure that this internet speed is solid. Those kinds of like logistics that I'm like, gotta think through it, gotta do it, and let's get through it. So I put some blank ones. So whether it's during the event, after the event. So after the event, in this particular case, my list would be send the presentation, send all the documents, send the blogs, send any of that stuff to you. So I hope that was very informative. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to end it with my contact information, which is right over here. So if you have any questions, and I will create you a list, Carly, please send me an email or text me or give me a call, but text is typically better. I hope that you found something useful here that you can walk away from and go like, yes, I'm going to implement that. I do specialize in other things. My upcoming webinar, I believe, is January 25th, where I talk about how to craft a story, how to prepare a press pitch. And what's so cool about it is last week I had that particular same webinar and I got an email from one of the webinar attendees that said, hey, I used your press strategy and even the template that you shared with me, and she was able to get her boyfriend's like business on KTLA or on one of the local newspapers. I think that was really, really cool and very rewarding for me to hear those positive stories. Or sometimes if things don't work out, I'd love to hear them too. The reason being is I want to be able to improve for the community that I'm in. I'm here to serve you and I'm here to help whatever the like branding or communication or whatever skills that I can contribute for you. So I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a happy, happy new year, and you're safe and that you're staying safe. But if there are any other questions, I'd love to hear them. But if not, I'd be able to close. Yes. All right, Carly, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to your email. When I do hope that you have a great new year, and if you both have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Okie dokie. All right, we'll talk soon, and thank you for attending our webinar.